This funny thing we do on Sunday mornings is what people have been doing for thousands of years. The oldest evidence of ritual, of people gathering for the purpose of addressing and or manipulating life's most profound questions, began in Africa some 70,000 years ago with the worship of the python, of a snake. They have not always had a dog in the background who is now scratching on the couch. So if you hear some dog noises in the background, this is how we're doing it now. But for these 70,000 years, we've come together, always in person up until 10 months ago, to breathe together, to share stories and songs, and to make meaning out of this thing called life. This practice of coming together is deep in our bones. Likewise, to belong to a group, to a band or a tribe, meant survival in a hostile world. And for many of us, in this hostile world, it still does. To belong to a community that sees us and hears us and holds our stories is a balm and a safety and a comfort. I want to spend some time this morning talking about what we mean by belonging in the context of the St. Croix Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, in the context of the Unitarian Universalist Association, what principles we live by, what it means to have skin in the game, what difference we make both in our beautiful St. Croix Valley and in the wider movement. This congregation was gathered in 2012, 8 years ago, by some of you who dreamed this into being. You met at the library. You knew that you needed a progressive religious community, a place where you could explore big questions without dogma that no longer served you. Well, I wasn't there. I imagine that this is what you dreamed because it's what you set in motion. And here we are, a progressive religious community, a place to explore big questions without a dogma that no longer serves us. You decided immediately to affiliate with the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association. Some of you questioned why we couldn't just be an unaffiliated congregation. But you knew, or you decided, you discerned that belonging to something bigger than yourselves could give you structure, common values, not feel so alone. We belong in greater, wider circles of being. We belong first in our families, either our family of origin or our family of choosing, or family of circumstance. And then this small group of friends, perhaps, this work community, this congregation community, this city, state, environment, this village, these greater sets of being. It is said that spirituality is individual and religion is communal. And I refer back to the root word of religion, which is religare, the Latin word religare. It's the same root as the word ligament, to bind. It is what binds us together. So, what binds us together? These values that we share. And in the Unitarian Universalist Association, our national association of congregations, we affirm and promote 7 principles and 6 sources. And let me just explain a little bit what these are. I'm going to start with the 6 sources, and then I'll go to the 7 principles. If you no longer affirm that the Bible are the scriptures, the canon of scriptures is a closed canon. These are the ones that we will use from which we draw our values. We'll discern from them. Then you have to decide, what will you use? What is your canon? We say that we have an open canon, things that we adhere to. And here is the way that the Unitarian Universalist Association describes our 6 sources. They are the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And spiritual teachings of earth-centered religions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Those are the 6 sources. Our 7 principles, first articulated in 1960 and then revised in 1984, and in the process now of being looked at again to make sure they still serve us. Unitarian Universalist Associations congregations affirm and promote these 7 principles, which we hold as strong values and moral guides. We live out these principles within a living tradition. They're not dogma or doctrine, but rather a guide for those of us who choose to join and participate in Unitarian Universalist religious communities. And our 7 principles are these. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I'm going to put a link in the chat. I'm just going to make myself a quick note to put a link in the chat where you can go to the UUA's website and find those 6 sources and 7 principles. They're in the very front of our gray hymnal that we have when we're in person, and you don't have to memorize them. You can look them up. In 2013, Unitarian Universalist activist and a member of the national staff, Paula Cole Jones, realized that you could be fully invested, live your life according to those 7 principles, and never have to negotiate with oppressions that marginalize people. You never have to fully deal with racism if you're working these 7 principles. I mean, we do affirm and promote the worth and dignity of every human being, but there was nothing in there that called us to dismantle the structures of racism. And so Ms. Jones proposed an 8th principle. And right now, this rather wordy principle is working its way through congregations around the UUA. Congregations are working on this language, working mostly with the idea. The idea is more important than the language at this point. And so my invitation to our steering committee last month, and now my invitation to you, is that SCOOF begin to explore, do we want to be a congregation that will sign on to this eighth principle. The idea of it, knowing that the language will be massaged. Here is the eighth principle. We, congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. That starts all the principles. Journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We're working toward spiritual wholeness to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other repressions in ourselves and in our communities. So as I say, that's a lot of words. No one thinks the language will wind up exactly that way. And it also does not mean that if we were to affirm this, we would automatically need to go out and loop in some members of color to change the hues in our pews. It's unlikely in Polk County, which has such a very, very small percentage of residents who are people of color, not zero, but not a great number. There are other things that we can do to address structural systemic racism, even from our vantage point. One of the things that it means to be a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to have a seat at the table where decisions are being made. Congregations who affirm, who vote to support this eighth principle all around the country, that support goes up to the UUA, our national association, and now they're looking at all of the principles and seeing how they serve us. And the more support we have for moving something with explicit language of anti-racism in, the better the chance that it will be affirmed by the UUA as a whole, all of the congregations. And I can talk more about the process of that. It will happen at the 2021 virtual General Assembly in June, and then the 2022 General Assembly, which I'm sure will be partially virtual and will, we hope, happen in person also in Portland, Oregon. Okay, that's a lot of inside baseball. I don't want to spend just all the time on that. What it means to be a member of the UUA and what it means to be a member of SCOOF are similar. It means to belong. It means to have a seat at the table where decisions are being made. In our bylaws, we say this about someone who is a member of this congregation. It's someone who is at least 16 years old, can become a voting member of the fellowship, who is in sympathy with our purpose and program, who has signed the membership book, perhaps virtually for now, and who supports the fellowship through personal and/or financial participation. It means that you can imagine that there are several ways to support SCOOF with time and talent and treasure. We don't require that members make a pledge. We know that a financial gift is not something that everyone can do. And still, we also know that it takes financial gifts to make this congregation strong and healthy. We're it, friends. There's no mother church that contributes to our work. This year, in COVID time, we are not sitting still, and we have gathered a stewardship team. Anne Turner, Jim Casterton, Bruce Philippi, I'm missing someone, Sue Matthews, and myself have gathered on this stewardship team, and we've been talking about stewardship as an act of worship, that it is the spirit in which we give. It's less about the amount that we give than the joyful sharing of gifts, because we believe in this project that we're a part of. A question gets asked a lot: do you need to be a member to pledge or give? Not at all. We have a category, even in our bylaws, from friends. who somebody who's in sympathy with the purpose and program of the fellowship, who wishes to receive communications and participate in activities of the fellowship. Some of you are unable or prefer not to become a member for a number of reasons, and yet you know that this congregation requires support. So what if you simply can't pledge, or you don't know what next year holds financially? Some of you may be in that boat. We had some 24 pledging units in 2020, and as Barb told us earlier, only about 2/3 of those have pledged for our 2021 program year. If you are in need, we have the means and the ability to help you. So if you are in financial need, please reach out. We may be able to make some small emergency gift to you. That's part of what your pledge does, is allow us to be able to reach out to people in need. And we are hopeful that you'll let us know one way or another. Even if you're unable to fulfill a pledge for next year, we hope you'll let us know so we don't have to hound you about it. And we don't want to do that. You don't want us to, right? So what does it mean to support our mission? What is our mission? We say recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service. The St. Croix Unitarian Universalist Fellowship gathers as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions, to increase goodness and justice. We welcome people of all beliefs, ages, classes, colors, ethnicities, abilities, sexual orientation, and gender identities and expressions. What drives us is the promise of a beloved community, a term popularized by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. King envisioned the beloved community as a society based on justice, equal opportunity, and love of one's fellow human beings. Fundamental to the concept of beloved community is inclusiveness, both economic and social. Wherever you are on the economic, social location wheel, you are welcome here. What drives us is creating inspiring moments, sharing our joys and sorrows with people who are willing to hold our stories tenderly as we hold theirs. What drives us is making a welcoming place for seekers, questioners, a place for theists, atheists, agnostics, humanists, religious naturalists to come together. What drives us is a place to share our search for spirituality.